Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, daring to do what no one else will. An interview with the woman behind Mexico's Blog del Narco about why she dares to expose the epidemic of murder and corruption that's terrorizing citizens and paralyzing the country's journalists. Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is here looking out for your live feedback. A lot of concern online from our community, Malika, about this idea that journalists are just going silent in Mexico.
And there is a bit of debate online about what would people do if they were in the journalist's shoes, but the prevailing voice seems to be what's only natural. Can you blame them?
Right.
Raphael tweets, I think they're human beings who, like most members of their species, fear for their safety and lives. Now, for those of you at home, we want you to join the conversation as well. So tweet us your questions and your comments using the hashtag AJStream.
And joining us on set is Stephen Dudley. He's the director at Insight Crime. Its objective is to increase research, analysis, and investigation of organized crime in Latin America and the Caribbean, and then to raise the level of debate about government efforts to combat it. Stephen, welcome to the stream.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. Remember, social media gives you a lot of options to stay in touch with us. You can follow us right there. Well, that's actually me. Follow us on Twitter. And you can also see links on our page to videos and websites that we're going to feature in this program and other shows that we've done. So go to twitter.com/AJStream.
Hi, my name is Jean. I'm from Zioni, Singapore, and I'm in the stream.
Tens of thousands have been killed as Mexico continues to be swept up in a drug war that has left the country plagued by violence, corruption, and tragedy. Facing constant death threats from cartels, many journalists have been forced to remain silent. At least 56 have been murdered since 2006. But one blogger has refused to succumb to intimidation, using a website to fill the gap left by traditional media. Blog del Narco emerged in 2010 in the midst of former President Felipe Calderón's war on drugs. Posting information about crimes not covered in the media, including graphic photos of drug-related violence, the site gained an impressive following of 25 million views per month. Some even turned to its gruesome images to identify the bodies of missing relatives. So, the stream arranged for a pre-taped interview with the journalist behind the blog. We're going to call her Lucy. And because of the serious nature of what she's doing and the fact that she's had collaborators murdered and is the constant subject of death threats, we've disguised her voice. So you're going to hear her, but you will not see her. We began by asking her what life has been like since she created the blog.
Son momentos muy difíciles, son momentos muy difíciles. Llega un momento en la vida individual de alguien que te preguntas y si vale la pena lo que estás haciendo. Siempre que me preguntaba si valía la pena lo que estaba haciendo, mi voz interior me contestaba que sí. ¿Por qué? Porque si yo no lo hacía, nadie lo iba a hacer. A veces duraba un mes, a veces duraba 2 meses, dependiendo. Nosotros teníamos a una persona dentro del gobierno federal en inteligencia que nos avisaba cuando estaban cerca de nosotros. Entonces era cualquier día, cualquier hora, muévete de donde estás, porque ya encontraron la zona, están cerca. Agarra lo que puedas, viaja ligero, aprendimos a viajar ligero, la verdad. Obviamente yo 2 años viví de mis ahorros personales, aprendí a vivir austeramente. En 2 años, yo te marco exactamente los 2 años porque fueron justo la época más difícil, ¿no? del bloque y de la violencia aquí en México. En 2 años yo no me compré un jeans nuevo, no me compré unos aretes. ¿Para qué me quería comprar aretes y para qué me quería comprar un jeans nuevo si no podía salir a la calle y vivir normal? Es cambiar un poco tu vida por una misión o por una creencia o por simplemente hacer una labor que nadie estaba haciendo y que pudo que alguien se hubiera atrevido a hacer.
It's really sobering to see how that has changed Lucy's life. Stephen, I want to get your thoughts on this. You know, she said she sometimes asks herself if it's worthwhile, and she says yes, because if she didn't do it, nobody would. So she's chosen this life of danger and isolation to bring all of this information forward. How do you think this blog has had an impact on Mexico?
Well, I think that the first thing that I take away from Lucy's experience in Blog del Narco is what it tells us about the state of the Mexican media right now and how much information we do or don't have about what is happening. You know, she reached a point where she decided to risk her life to put out information that she felt like was not being put out by the mainstream media for whatever reason, for threats, for having connections to government officials, for any number of reasons, and there are myriad reasons why. And so that's the first thing that I take away from it. Then when she gets into it, and now she is actually, I think, set up some sort of a model. I think she says that if I didn't do it, no one would do it. I actually think that now, because of what she's done, other people would fill that gap.
And speaking of that, I want to bring in some of our other guests. Joining us from Cancun is Lydia Cacho, a Mexican journalist, author, and feminist activist against violence. Currently, Ms. Cacho is a columnist with El Universal, the main national newspaper in Mexico. And with us from Mexico City is Ricardo Bernal, a global officer at Article 19, a group that is dedicated to the right of freedom of expression and freedom of information. Welcome to both of you. Lydia, pick up on what Stephen was just saying in terms of the impact of the blog and whether Lucy really is actually empowering journalists and citizen journalists to perhaps follow in her footsteps.
I think it's quite different. I think what she's doing is really important for some people, but it's not journalist in the adequate sense. What I mean is some of us journalists around Mexico, I have to defend this, most of us are working in all provinces in Mexico. I mean, there are two kinds of media, right? You have corporate media that has corporative interests that are protecting that with links and corruption with the government. But then you also have other kind of journalists, reporters that are working all around Mexico, and we are risking our lives every day to do it properly, to do it from an ethical stand of view. We have different ways to demonstrate what we are exposing, to interview people that can be interviewed. So it's two different things. And I don't think that what the Blog del Narco is doing is... it might be feeding some journalists, not me particularly, but I don't think it's something that is not being done. I think that a lot of us are doing it from a different point of view. I think it's really brave what she's doing, but I don't think it's journalists.
Ricardo, weigh in on this for us. Is Lucy doing something that is not being done? Is she exposing things that other journalists may perhaps be just unable to do because of the extreme threats that are out there against them? Or do you think that journalism in general in Mexico, journalists are generally covering what Lucy is covering?
Oh, well, I think there are, I mean, besides any concerns that we could say about whether it's journalism or it's not, I mean, what we can really say at the moment is that, Blog del Narco and other blogs with that kind of work, they're actually becoming a response to the lack of information. In some parts, Blog del Narco and other sources like that are the only reliable source of information. I mean, as a human rights organization, I would say that I would not qualify whether it's journalism or citizen journalism, but what I can really say is that they really serve in a purpose. I mean, I do understand that there's a difference between what journalists in Mexico City or in other parts of the country are doing, doing investigative reporting on what the Blog del Narco is doing. But in reality, they both exercising the same right, and they're, at the end of the day, they're actually serving the same purpose, which is to maintain timely and reliable information to society, to Mexican society.
And Stephen, picking up on that, I mean, I mentioned at the top of the show that online there's debate over whether or not this is journalism, whether or not they're filling a gap. I want to dip into it. Stay Cool Fanzine says there have also been accusations of narco journalists who misreport and self-censor. Now that's on the one hand. Then you have Facebook comments like Ray Tonys who says the pen is mightier than the sword and more mightier than keyboards. Kudos to all of you. And a tweet from Frank who says these journalists are smart. We need more like them. A dead journalist isn't much good to anyone. Speaking of those who have arguably gone gone silent. Now, you were recently in Mexico, Nuevo Laredo, which is just across the border from Texas, Laredo, Texas, and you said that that was a time that you felt the most precarious in your life as a journalist. Tell us why.
Well, I think just first about whether or not it's journalism or not it's journalism. I think the important thing is that it fills this void. It fills a gap, and that this is all that's left for a lot of people. That's probably the most important thing. And then you take a step back, and anyone who looks at the media always has to consider the source. You know, what I see in Blog del Narco is not necessarily journalism. I see a lot of what I would call raw feeds of things that oftentimes drug traffickers want us to see for whatever reason, whether they want to elicit some sort of fear inside of us or elicit fear in a rival or send a message, whatever it is. But I see a lot of what I would call raw feeds. It's not necessarily journalism per se, but it serves a purpose. It helps me understand, or at least begin to pull together the pieces that understand what's going on in different places in Mexico, where we have this huge gap, this huge lack of information. And then with regards to actually doing journalism in different parts of Mexico, I was in Nuevo Laredo. But to be honest, I spent most of my time in Laredo, and I would go across during the day to Nuevo Laredo. In other words, United States into Mexico, do reporting in Mexico, and then return and sleep in the United States, because I can do that. I have that possibility of doing that. But people and journalists in Mexico don't have that luxury. Right. And the feeling of actually being, you know, at risk or feeling of insecurity that I had in Nuevo Laredo was about as high as I've felt for a lot of reasons. I mean, Nuevo Laredo has not had an active police force in 2 years. The only people who are patrolling the streets are military forces. For example, just to give you an example, so who do I go to if something is happening? I know that there are certain dynamics in the criminal world right now that make Nuevo Laredo the sort of object of desire of different groups. So there's a lot of fighting going on, but we don't know how much fighting is going on, and we don't have any information. One of the essences of insecurity comes from the fact that we don't have information. So I'm going into a place where there's no police force. We know there's a lot of fighting, but actually the local newspaper has even said, we are no longer going to cover anything to do with organized crime. Exactly. They actually wrote that in an editorial. So we don't have any information. So that feeling of insecurity, of being naked, of being out there and not having sort of any backstop.
And thus blogs like Lucy's.
Well, yeah.
And that's a blog like Lucy. Worse for Lucy, of course, because she's Mexican. I mean, I can go in and go out, but these people cannot.
And one of the reasons journalists are feeling that way is because, I mean, a lot of people are saying it's because of the government, because, you know, they have failed to protect journalists from the drug cartels. And these journalists have been repeatedly harassed and threatened and kidnapped and at times killed. So that was one of the things we asked Lucy about the state of journalism in Mexico today.
Yo no puedo hablar ahorita del sexenio actual porque va empezando. No sabemos si nos va a tocar mejor, peor o igual. Pero sí te puedo hablar de 6 años al menos donde no se le brindaron las garantías al periodista, donde se le coartó la libertad de expresión al periodista y donde no se le daba realmente la libertad de cumplir con su trabajo, donde el gobierno creía que efectivamente cada periodista le servía a el gobierno y no al pueblo mexicano. Esa diferencia entre que el periodista le sirviera al gobierno o le sirviera al pueblo mexicano se notó y se notó mucho. El periodismo no está muerto nada más en Reynosa. El periodismo está muerto en todo México. El verdadero periodismo. Pues los periodistas, al igual que los ciudadanos, necesitan realmente recuperar su país. El gobierno no debe recuperar el país. Los mexicanos en general debemos recuperar el país.
Lydia, one of the things that Lucy said was that the government has said every journalist was at the service of government and wasn't at the service of the Mexican people. Do you find that to be the case in your daily reporting?
I agree, again, in part of what Lucy's saying. I think that generalization is really dangerous because it endangers most of us that are really, working every day doing journalism all over Mexico. I live in the southeast of Mexico, where it's not like the north because nothing is in the open. But right now, just the General District Attorney of Cancun, of Quintana Roo, where Cancun and Playa del Carmen are, recently said that 70% of his police are taken by the cartel Los Zetas, which means it's quite different because the governor of Quintana Roo is dealing with the Zetas in order for this to be quiet and tranquil, in order for tourism to keep on going. But the fact is that killings are taking place and we're covering that and we're risking our lives in a different way. So I do not believe that most of journalists is dead, absolutely not. I do believe, again, that corporate media is making deals with the actual government in order to cover up certain things. Then on the other hand, we have these governors all over Mexico, not only in the northern parts, but everywhere, including Mexico City now, that are not doing anything to protect journalists, not because they can't, but because they won't, because it is good for them. For reporters like me and like many others, like all our friends in Veracruz, for example, that is not exactly the north of Mexico, who are risking their lives every day. The governor of Veracruz is really, really enjoying the fact that they are fleeing the state because he's just happy that nobody will investigate him. So the same thing is happening all over the southeast. You have Tabasco, you have Veracruz, you have Mexico, you have Puebla, you have Quintana Roo. All the south of Mexico is in a different state, of course. It's not as raw. The violence is not as raw as it is in the north. But you cannot say that journalism is dead. Not at all. I believe that some of the media are doing the right thing, saying we're not going to cover certain issues of the narco. But what I'm saying is that most of us are covering from a different perspective. We are covering from the voice of the victims. We're covering from the voice of some of the survivors of the victims, like the wives of the narcos or the wives of the traffickers. So what I mean when I say that journalism is alive is that otherwise this country will not understand what is going on. Yes, some bloggers are doing a good job. Some tweeters are doing a great job telling people around their community that they're in danger and they shouldn't go out in the street, or that there's someone being killed in a certain part of the city and they shouldn't go there.
And speaking of tweeters doing a good job, we're getting lots of tweets here from people weighing in on what you're saying. Roberto says the government is being very irresponsible. Now they're hiding the information related to violence. Many newspapers are being censored. No bad news. And another from Mr. Johnson who says the government is as responsible as any other government is responsible for law and order. Being a failed state doesn't absolve them of their responsibilities. Ricardo, I want you to weigh in on this and whether or not you think journalists are allowed to talk about organized crime.
I mean, maybe we could make some precisions around that. I mean, there are some journalists that are publishing books, running newspapers specialized in organized crime, and I think this is a quite important precision, because the problem is not to speak in general about organized crime. The problem is when journalists are investigating the corruption or the links between the organized crime and the government. So I mean, that's the main source of threat, and I think this is a different story from which President Calderón as president and now President Peña Nieto is saying all around the world. I mean, yes, you can speak about what the organized crime is doing. Actually, sometimes they're actually really keen, for journalists to actually report on their stories. The problem is when they are speaking or investigating around the links between their work, their criminal acts, and the work of the government. That's the main source of threat at the moment. And I would also like to talk about a little bit about what Lydia was saying. I do believe that, if journalism was dead, well, during the last years, is now having some sort of a revival. I mean, Lydia Cacho is an example, Marcela Turati, and there's a lot of female journalists that are actually, putting themselves in the middle of the crossfire to actually, report on sensitive issues. So, I would not really, agree with Lucy in this sense. There are a lot of examples of courageous journalists that are actually, overcoming their own fears to actually, perform their duty to inform the people. So I really think that Organized crime is not a taboo. The problem is when you start investigating around corruption issues.
Well, as traditional media has gone silent, these blogs like Lucy's and social media in general have really become important. They've become a main source of information for a lot of people. One of our final questions to Lucy was about the blog del Narco and why she thought that it was so important.
Si no hubiera existido el blog, más muertos. ¿Por qué? Porque no hubiera existido una pequeña lupa como nosotros, porque no hubiera existido la clase de prevención que nosotros brindamos, tanto a los jóvenes, para que no se metieran en eso, como para los ciudadanos, porque aquí, imagínate tú si nadie dice nada de lo que está pasando en Tamaulipas, la gente va de vacaciones a Tamaulipas y se mete a la boca del lobo. Aquí pasa. La cuestión es que antes la violencia se daba principalmente en Nuevo León y Tamaulipas, pero ahora hay una violencia imparable en Coahuila, en Veracruz, en Zacatecas, San Luis Potosí, Guanajuato, Guerrero. Acapulco es conocido mundialmente y pasan las cosas más brutales que nos podamos imaginar en Guerrero. Son muy más que sanguinarios, no encuentro la palabra correcta, pero dejaban a personas sin la piel, les quitaban la piel y dejaban las puras calacas con la carne afuera de bares y antros de Acapulco, Guerrero. Con las tripas, con los intestinos de un cuerpo formaban narcomensaje.
Stephen, you touched on this at the beginning of the show, which was the importance of this blog and really the niche that it has filled, which now a niche of 25 million people a month coming to this site. What do you think the role is more broadly in terms of social media moving forward in Mexico and exposing this, corruption and collusion?
Well, I'm not sure I see much of a role in terms of exposing corruption. What I see is a bit of what Lydia and Roberto were alluding to, which is filling, and even Lucy herself, filling these gaps of knowledge about whether it's sort of an attack on a street during that day, so you might go to #ReynosaFollow, or more along the lines of what Lucy was saying, you probably shouldn't go to Tamaulipas because Tamaulipas is a very dangerous place right now, even though government statistics probably don't reflect that. So those are the types of, at least the type of role that I see for social media. I think that what Lydia and Roberto said is exactly right. I think that we have to depend on professional journalists for a certain part of this. Not every story needs to be about a shootout. Not every story needs to be about the latest kingpin to sort of take over an area. There are plenty of other stories to do, and I think that there are journalists who are doing them, and those are the corruption stories. Those are the stories that go that one level deeper to understand, why Mexican society has had to face down this terrible sort of murderous, intractable conflict that it finds itself in.
There are those that argue, though, that without an educated society about these issues, about the drug pins, about the murders, about these mass kidnappings, that you can't have a civil society. And people fear that much of Mexico is now going uneducated in this realm because media has essentially been shut down, or at least had a very tight framework put on it.
I don't think that that's true. I think that we continue to have more information than we've ever had. Now, in specific circumstances, like I was saying, social media can play a very important role, alerting people to certain areas that might be facing some sort of conflict. Or there was a conflict, a gun battle really in the last few weeks, where only social media covered that, so that we had an understanding of what was happening in that area. But the deeper things, the systemic problems that Mexico is facing, I think that we still have to rely on media, traditional media, professional media groups, organizations, personnel, to dig those things up.
Going to stop you there. Thanks to all of our guests for joining us. Please join us in the post-show where we are going to continue this conversation at stream.aljazeera.com. Welcome to the Streams Online Post Show. We're continuing our discussion on the impact of the influential Blog del Narco on Mexico and the drug war in the country. Earlier, we played excerpts from an interview with the anonymous woman behind that blog. But still with us are Stephen Dudley, Lydia Cacho, and Ricardo Bernal. And Ricardo, I want to get out to you to pick up the discussion where we left off with Stephen, and that is the role of social media and what it plays in terms of moving this type of discussion forward in Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Twitter, especially Twitter, I mean, has become a tool to actually, you know, give a hint or security tips to, you know, to the general public. I'm not sure, and I do agree that, I mean, we haven't seen any investigative reporting, you know, being released by Twitter users or anything like that. I think it's helping to overcome the informative vacuum that is currently, you know, hitting, well, especially Tamaulipas. But I mean, we don't see this kind of bloggers like we do in other countries that they're actually, you know, releasing in-depth analysis or information or investigative reporting pieces. But we're seeing it's only, you know, a crude reaction, the vacuum we have in Tamaulipas and in the northern states. So, I mean, it is a tool, but I mean, we need more than 140 characters to actually make sense of what's going on in a lot of places. So, I mean, that's why I do understand that, you know, the rise of, for example, Valor of Tamaulipas, recently Twitter user that shut down his account because of.
I think we're having a little bit of trouble with Ricardo's audio.
Well, he mentioned that we need more than 140 characters to get across, you know, the severity of what's happening in Mexico, and he's completely right. So we asked our community whether or not they think social media is an effective and a safer alternative to regular on-the-ground journalism. Ahmed says the role of social media can't be denied as they're adapting the role of the newsroom. But then on the other hand, Raisa says, have you heard of Valor Tamaulipas? They provide information to keep people safe when the government won't. Now that account was closed just a few days ago, and they were forced to go underground. So Lydia, I want to go to you because, you know, as a journalist that's on the ground, you've been abducted, you've faced torture, you've faced abuse, and your base is still out there. You're on the show today. So what is it that keeps you going, and what is it that keeps you in Mexico?
Well, it's the same thing that keeps most of us here. It's our country. We're not going to let go, you know, that easily. And I'm a professional journalist. Everything that I've done was useful to my community. I know that there is a great impact in what Ricardo was saying, that the journalists writing books, because some of my books have had a great impact in not only in telling people what's going on, but also in the roots of that problem. In this case, child pornography and sex trafficking and other kinds of human trafficking in Mexico. What has happened, thanks to my book and to other people who has also investigated in that, is that we have new laws. We have some people in jail because of that. So the purpose of journalism, as you know, is exactly to go in deeper, to help society not only understand what's going on, but also get educated. So I want to go back to what you just said, that civil society is not that strong in Mexico. I have to defer with that. I really think that in the last 6 years, Mexican civil society has empowered tremendously because of pain, because of the death, because of this, of all the kidnappings. But we are stronger than we have ever been. And then talking about social media, also, I want to say that we not only have Twitter, which is great because in some sense, people from other states can let people from another part of the country to understand the things that nobody would read because it's written in small local media outlets. So it's like in Ohio. Ohio is the third state with sex trafficking in the U.S. Most of people in New York will never know unless they tweet about it, which is great. So I think social media is great. And we also have other media like Sin Embargo, what I write, that is sort of the Mexican Huffington Post. And what happens with this media is it's non-traditional media, and it's doing a great job, and it's full of brave journalists from all over Mexico that are writing there. So I think we do have other outlets, and I do not believe that we must be horrifying people all the time. I think we should show the problem, but if we keep on talking only about the deaths and the way people is being assassinated by the organized crime, we're only empowering that part of the story. We have to tell the other part of the story, how victims are becoming survivors and they're changing things locally. So I think there's a lot of great things being happening, and that's why I'm still here.
So, Stephen, we've got about a minute left in the program. You know, there are many brave journalists in Mexico, like Lydia, certainly bloggers like Lucy. Is there any kind of safety net for journalists there?
Currently, unfortunately, there isn't. There are increasing numbers of laws. There have been commissions created within Mexico to look at this. There are all of the makings of something that is a stronger network. There are organizations like Artículo 19, Ricardo's organization, which is a fantastic resource and that journalists need to use. But right now, journalists are still very exposed, and especially in certain parts. It's not all over the country, but in certain parts of that country, journalists cannot, and they've even said it out loud, we cannot do our jobs. And they need help. They need people to go out there and help them.
All right. Stephen Dudley, Lydia Cacho, and Ricardo Bernal, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to post the full transcript of our interview with Lucy on our site at stream.aljazeera.com, so make sure to check that out. But before we go today, Malika's got a few other stories that we're following.
We start today in Paris, where a man reportedly beaten for walking with his boyfriend is using social media to fight back. Wilfred de Bruyn posted this photo on Facebook, writing, "Sorry to show you this. It's the face of homophobia." De Bruyn went on to write that he and his boyfriend were walking arm in arm when the attack happened. "I woke up in an ambulance covered in blood, missing a tooth and broken bones around the eye. I'm home now. Very sad." The photo has received more than 7,000 shares and comments from around the world in solidarity. Using de Bruyn's face as a symbol, activists are planning a rally for April 10th in the historic gay district of Paris. Rights groups say there's been a marked increase in anti-gay incidents this year amid the country's fierce gay marriage debate. The Senate is expected to vote on legalization next week. And our next leads out of Kenya, which is celebrating its first presidential inauguration of the social media age. Kenyans on Twitter followed President Uhuru Kenyatta's swearing in using hashtags like Uhuru Inauguration and Inauguration KE. They also used hashtag Change of Guard, applauding the peaceful transition of power and the lack of violence that marked the 2007 elections. Dennis tweets, "I love what I'm watching, whichever candidate I supported. Better scenes than 2007 or 2002. We have matured." While others were more cautious, Sunny Bindra tweets, "If done with big hearts, days like today can be great for building national spirit and unity. If." We'll continue to follow reactions from Kenya, so tell us, what are your expectations for Kenyatta's presidency? Your answers could end up in our coverage. Lisa?
All right, on Wednesday, as Libya struggles with armed militias and rising instability, you're going to hear from an army of young activists who are doing everything they can to keep the country moving forward. Until then, we'll see you online.